chance for a question and answer period this evening. This is a nice way to connect. It's very good that we have this chance to be together. There's a kind of communication that can happen when we're together in this way, can communicate two ways. A lot of modern communication is just one-way communication. There's the sense that certain people have very important things to say, and so we should listen to them. But wisdom is at least as much the ability to listen as the ability to speak. And so if we want to work with a wise person, it's very important that we are listened to by them. Otherwise, how will we receive their wisdom? Their listening is a demonstration of their wisdom. And a lot of modern communication doesn't take this into account. There are books. You just read the book and think you're getting the important thing, but the important thing is that they listen to you. That's very important. And the book can't listen to you on their behalf. So we end up training ourselves to think that wisdom is a bunch of words. But wisdom is in connection. And so we have the chance now to connect. And it seems that everybody is seated again, so if there are any questions, we can discuss them now. Mm-hmm.
How would you go about helping somebody who is not trustworthy become trustworthy?
So the question is, how would you help someone become trustworthy who is not trustworthy? Yes? Well, let me ask you a question in return. Have you tried that?
I know that these words are a little bit subjective.
Yeah.
Maybe in the past.
So in the past you have tried helping people to become more trustworthy. Yes?
Well, I think that we all are helping each other become more trustworthy, so maybe it was facetious of me to say to call a person untrustworthy, since that's subjective. But how does one actually, day to day, train trustworthiness?
How does one train others in trustworthiness day to day?
Yes.
Well, it's a good question. Of course, you know the answer because that's what we do here. So you create a community so that, as you say, it's possible for us to train each other in trustworthiness, right? So we're connected to each other, and most important, we can't avoid each other. That's the most important part of it. So if we're always around the people we want to be around, it's very difficult for us to gain wisdom, to become more trustworthy. The good news is that a lot of us have to spend time around people we don't want to be around. So that's good, because that's when training becomes easy, or easier, you might say. So you create a community in which people train together, connect with each other. Within that, you do actually establish certain rules and guidelines. But those rules and guidelines should be designed to enable people to go beyond those rules and guidelines, so they don't need them anymore. Yes? So So it's not that we're saying that rules and guidelines are bad things, or that control is a bad thing. We're just saying it has to be in its appropriate place. Beyond that, you need a training mechanism so that they won't need them anymore. And I think that this is perhaps at the heart of your question. How do you do that? And what we just did is a good example of how to do that. You set aside your opinions, set aside your thoughts, set aside your positions, and pay attention to this right now. Pay attention to this right now. Okay? As you pay attention to this right now, one learns to cut through the sense of selfishness and conceit, sense of hatred or fear, and sense of ignorance or the delusion of living in a dream world, as most of us do most of the day. Yes? If we're cutting through that, then we're becoming more trustworthy. And so we offer people techniques to do that, an environment in which we're encouraged to do that, and guidelines of how to live so that we don't do too much harm as we move in that direction. Does that answer your question? Yes? What does "I think so" mean in this case?
I guess I was just thinking about how people would ask me this, and then how would I explain it? And I'm just trying to convert what you just said into how I would share that with somebody who is not experienced with this sort of situation.
And how would you do that?
Having to be around people that we don't want to be around.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps us accountable to letting go of acting from emotional activation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Great. Yeah, I think that's a very good starting point. I think for most people it is very difficult to accept how deluded we really are, except the extent to which we live in a dream world that is designed by selfish intentions. I think that it's very hard for us to accept. And so a lot of the explanation is in how do you give people the bad news so that they are open to the good news. That you can cut through all that, and it's much better when you do. That's a real challenge. People do not want to face that. It's a major block for us. So a lot of it is in, as you're describing, is in trying to make it available to people. And that can be in very simple ways. It's good to be around people who hold you accountable. You know, just that is very important. But the depths of wisdom, love, and power are hard to see, and so oftentimes we have to take many steps there. Does that make sense? Anything else on that?
That was the heart of the question.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's good for you to try. Does that make sense? I would encourage you to not wait until you have some kind of wisdom you don't have. But because I found, and this might change, and it might just be because I'm in a certain environment a lot. Over time this might change, but for now I'm finding that I don't think I'm getting better, and maybe I'm getting worse at answering these sorts of questions to people who haven't spent a lot of time looking at this. So I'm very glad that I spent time earlier in my practice, yes, before I was as aware of the depths, talking about the more shallow aspects. It's very important. As our practice is deepening, we don't just wait until it's deep. There are things we can say that will be harder to say later on, but are still the correct next step. Does that make sense? So it's very important that you do that. Mm-hmm.
The cutting through that you just mentioned?
Yeah.
So you're experiencing the objective world as
Mm-hmm.
it is, and then you say you cut through, and then that cutting through sort of releases the ignorance, or somehow like, I don't know exactly the words you use, but there's something to me that is just like, my translation is of cutting through is magic happens,
Yeah, right.
and
Good.
I'm curious if there's a more clear
Great.
translation.
Great, yes. So there's the sense of we're attending to the objective world. Thoughts and emotions captivate our attention. We cut through those thoughts and emotions and return to the objective world. And you're saying this, quote, cut through the thought is just sort of magic. Hopefully that happens, but you'd like a more precise explanation.
Sorry, no, okay, so cutting through is the wrong thing then. So we're attending to the world, we have thoughts and emotions, we cut through those, and we continue to attend to the world. And the thing that is the magic happens part that I'm trying to understand is somehow doing that turns into these positive outcomes.
Oh, okay, great. Good. So, once again, we're attending to the objective world. Thoughts and emotions arise. We cut through them, return to the objective world, and then something good happens. And that just seems like magic. Why would something good happen next?
Yeah.
And you'd like an explanation for that, right?
Something like it feels like all the meditation techniques
Yeah.
have that kind of quality of do this,
Yeah.
attend to that,
Yeah.
and then down the line there's this thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that like middle ground space of the changeover. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. So I think one reason that it seems like then magic happens is that it sort of does. It sort of is magic. Or at least it's miraculous. And what is the magic? Well, the magic is that you don't make it happen. You do your part, and then some other thing happens, and it's amazing. So it's sort of like, so I'm supposed to be writing a book now, and I've written before, although I don't have the time to write well now, but hopefully I will soon. When I've written before, the instructions for how you write a good book is something like, this is what you do. You want to do something else. You cut through that, sit down at your desk, and start writing. And then you remember, but I would like such and such. And then you cut through that, and you keep writing. And then magic happens. And you have written something good. And that can take a long time or not, yes? It might take a morning, depending on what you're writing. It might take a year, depending on what you're writing. But in any case, that's what you do. And a lot of the time when you're sitting there writing, you're not writing anything that good. And you throw it away. It didn't work. The magic didn't happen yet. But how do you get the magic to happen? Well, you don't do other things, and you do this thing. And then magic happens. And then you could ask, but how? And it's sort of like, well, we could try to explain it, but it doesn't actually matter because you know the term daemon, this spirit who comes and kind of possesses you and offers creativity into your book or article or whatever you're writing. Maybe that's what it is, but that's just another way of saying magic happens. Maybe something or other, but in any case, magic happens. So I think that it's very important that we're open to the possibility that magic happens. Okay? Nonetheless, I just tried to explain this, so I'll try again, and maybe magic will happen. Yeah.
I feel you answered it for me personally.
Yeah, it's sort of fun though. Because I tried to explain this, and I want to say it again. So, why would a positive state come from cutting through thoughts and emotions? And here it is. Human beings have a great deal of power. That power is based on a certain mechanism. And that mechanism is shared thoughts and emotions. When human beings share a way of seeing things and a way of feeling, we get a lot of stuff done. Okay? So we look at things in the same way and we feel the same way. We can act together with enormous power. The issue is that those thoughts are imaginary. Our thoughts, our understanding of the world, we have a model of the world in our heads, in our minds. That model is, to some extent, inaccurate. And it turns out it's actually extremely inaccurate. Okay? These feelings, it turns out that they're somewhat selfish. And it turns out that they're extremely selfish. Because of that, our cooperative action, which is to say our power, is bound up in delusion and selfishness. If you cut through the thoughts and emotions, then you open up to something that is less delusional and less self-centered. I'm not saying it's totally true or loving, not pure truth or love, but less made up, less greedy. And what is that? Well, that's just this floor. That's just that bird. That's all. And you attend to that and discover that in that, there is a feeling of love. And that there really is. It's not made up, or at least it's much less made up. There are further steps you can take. Beyond that, there is a sense of what we should do with our lives. There is information about how to live in the chirp of the bird. Not theoretically. That's the point. It's not at all theoretical. We are directly informed how to live our lives in this moment, what to do. Really what to do. I mean, what job should I take? What relationship should I be in? It's there. Practical. What lunch should I eat? It's right there. And we can only resist it. We either give in and live our true life according to this information and love that's available, or we resist it. How do we resist it? By entering a dream world. We enter this imaginary world. That imaginary world can be shared in a certain way, and human beings share that in a certain way. And that sharing makes a great deal of power. We can cooperate extremely effectively based on this delusional self-centeredness. Does that make sense? But there is another way to cooperate, which the whole universe is already doing, including us. And if we can stay in that, then we can cooperate in a much more beautiful way. And that's the good thing. So how do you do it? You prevent yourself from doing all the other things you want to do other than write your book. You prevent yourself from going into thoughts and emotions, and you just stay at that desk and keep writing, maybe bad stuff. You just stay right here and attend to this moment, even if it's awful. Even if it just seems like you're going crazy. Whereas if you're really going crazy, then you want to get assistance. You want to find someone who will prevent you. Because if you're going crazy, then that can be quite harmful. So you want to be careful, but you feel like you're not getting anywhere. Everything becomes meaningless, not meaningful, oftentimes. Becomes awful, not beautiful, oftentimes. And yet you just keep on going with it, and then the magic happens. And in general, it doesn't happen in a moment any more than a book is written in a moment. But you just get into this flow and you work and work and work, and something happens. And it's good. Turns out to be good. So does that help to a certain extent? This is very hard for us to understand. It's very difficult. Incredibly hard for us to understand this. Very hard. But a lot of things are hard. It's hard to write a book, you know? It's hard. That's part of life. Anything else, or shall we finish there? Yes.
You said wisdom is not imaginary.
Yes. Wisdom is not imaginary.
How can you tell?
Because, there's a good question. How can you tell that wisdom is not imaginary? It's a great question. So when you make something up, when you fabricate something, at that time, you actively fabricate it. We do a pretty good job of hiding our constant fabrication of this moment's experience from ourselves. We are manipulating our sensory experience and our behavior all the time. I shouldn't say all the time. It's possible to not do it, but that's so rare that we can say, quote all the time, approximately all the time. Human beings are generally manipulating, making up experience. But if you're doing it, you know you're doing it. Because you have to be actively doing it. You can, if you wish, cover that up with this fabrication of not knowing that you're doing it. Okay? But that also is fabricated, and you know you're doing that. And so you can cover that up. But that also is fabricated, and you know you're doing that. You're actively, if you're making stuff up, then you are actively making stuff up. This is intentional, even though it may be unconscious. Okay? It may be unconscious, but it is intentional. We do lots of things intentionally, unconsciously. So, as you notice that when you notice that you're making things up, you learn how to stop doing that. You gradually come to the point of seeing it's possible to stop that activity. And then the next deeper delusion emerges. And we learn how to stop maintaining that delusion. But each time we do it, we realize that we were actively doing it, which means that we knew, something in us knew that we were doing it, because we knew what we were trying to do. That's how we were trying to do it. Is this making sense?
The last bit seemed not
Yes.
obvious.
Not obvious. So again, a lot of it's unconscious, but even you can know it underneath the threshold of conscious awareness, but you're still doing it on purpose. Even at the level of I'm looking out and seeing trees, that is a fabrication. That's a manipulation of sensory experience. And you could say, well, that's underneath the threshold of conscious awareness, and in fact, I can't even not do it, right? Or it's interesting, you can look at letters of a language that you know, or characters of a language that you know, and actually discover that you're incapable of not turning it into sounds in your head. It's interesting. You're incapable of not seeing it as a letter or as a character. You look at it and you can't stop it. But you look at a character from another language that you don't know, and you can't do it. You cannot understand what that character means, what that letter indicates, right? But the good news is that with this practice, you can start to see how you are constructing, fabricating the sense that that character has that meaning. And you can learn how to not do it. You can learn how to stop doing that again, even though you learned it when you were 5 or something. You can actually undo that doing. And in the same way, you can undo the doing of looking in that direction and seeing trees. As you do that, as you do the undoing of the doing, as you do that, you see that it was an intentional construction. Yes?
So now I understand wisdom is not imaginary. That means that it is in fact just not imaginary. It's just like not something that you're making up.
Right.
But why do we call it wisdom then? Like, wisdom implies that it's better or that it's wiser? I don't understand that.
Wiser than what?
I don't know.
It's just, wisdom is only wiser than delusion. Wisdom is the ordinary thing, and delusion is a special thing.
But like, whatever's left over after all the delusion is gone, like, why would I then call that more trustworthy or more good?
Because it's not mistaken. It cannot be mistaken. It's shocking that it's not meaningless. This is maybe the magic part. It is shocking that it's not just nothing. That it's peaceful and joyous and significant. It's perfect.
But don't I have to use perception to gather that it is perfect?
To gather the concept, yes, but not to have the experience. Yeah, what you said is exactly right. It's not perception. All perception is fabrication.
Do you see how this is very confusing?
It's very confusing. It doesn't fit into thinking, but it's amazing.
How do I have any experience without perception, without perceiving?
Yeah, this is the whole question. No perception, no feeling, no consciousness.
Isn't it the same as just being unconscious?
It is incredibly not. It's amazing. It's amazing. And there's a cessation of perception, a cessation of feeling, a cessation of consciousness. And yet it's not just nothing. It's incredible. You can't believe it. It doesn't seem fair. That's why Peace Pilgrim said, while you're walking the path, it seems very difficult. But when you've realized the fruit of the path, you look back and think, how could something so wonderful come so easily? It's not appropriate that something infinitely wonderful could come with finite effort. It doesn't seem right. And yet, there it is. It is that way. It's the amazing thing. There's no other way to say it.
Given how ridiculous that sounds, it seems like, how do I get anyone else on board? Like, this is like a ridiculous claim.
Ridiculous claim.
Like,
Yeah.
Like, other people would think that that is crazy.
Yeah. So all I can say is that I have the sense, of course we think it's crazy. We definitely think it's crazy. And it seems that we think it's crazy because of our belief that goodness, that the highest goodness is created. That the goodness in the world is something that human beings put into it. That when we see good things, we see the things that we made. But that's just entirely self-referential and sadly, ultimately meaningless. And so the shift comes, sorry to put it this way, but the shift comes in the Four Noble Truths, which is that you see that, so the third Noble Truth is this thing we're talking about, cessation. And in particular, the cessation of suffering. And so we see that the thing that we create is suffering. We understand it to be happiness and peace. But in fact, it is incomplete, it's inadequate, it's untrustworthy, it's not dependable, and it's false. And so we see everything backward and upside down. We see everything backward because we have the sense that goodness is the thing that I create, that creation is goodness. But we discover later that relinquishment of all of that is better. There's a great disciple of St. Francis, who I've mentioned sometimes, Brother Gilles, and he made this statement. He said, that which can be seen and heard and felt and known isn't 1/10 isn't 1/100th, isn't the slightest portion of that which cannot be seen or heard or felt or known. It's not nearly as wonderful. We discover that all of this fabrication of our eyes, ears, bodies, minds, everything we create isn't as good as relinquishing all of that. Or as they say in Zen, even a good thing isn't as good as nothing. And we see that it's that the whole time we've been looking at it completely backward. But then you ask the very important question, how do you get anyone on board with that? Because we have that way of looking at it. And in order for any of this to make sense, you have to change that whole thing. And unfortunately, that brings us to the first noble truth, which is it's just when we keep on trying this same way, and it just keeps on causing more problems than it solves. It just keeps on happening, and it happens that way on a personal level, and it happens that way on a global level. We just keep on thinking. And even if you look at a specific manifestation of this, there is nature, in which human beings are born and die. And we think, that is a big problem. That is terrible. We will create a new and better world in which nature is destroyed. And out of it, we will create a world in which we do not die. That's what we'll do. Yes. And then we try it. And we have the sense, because we're so convinced, as the Buddha said, the basic problem for us is that we confuse suffering for happiness and happiness for suffering. We're actually deluded at that level, which is what we're talking about right now. We have the sense that things are getting better, and yet here we are, destroying life on the planet. And it's very hard for us to shift it and see, oh, all of this doing that we've been working on has been delusional. That's really hard for us. All the sunk costs, you don't want to admit it. Really hard to admit it. Let's say, oops. But ultimately, we're humbled by this very suffering. And that's, if you have a better way than that, let's do it. That's what I try to do with my life. You know, how do we get people on board with this? It's a great question.